Hey there, I'm so pumped to tell you about an amazing new community I've launched called Grief to Growth Circle Community. It's a space for people who are grieving to come together to support each other, and for people who want to know who we are, why we're here, and where we're going to have those conversations, all the things we talk about on the podcast. So I invite you to join me at grieftogrowth.com/community to become part of this compassionate crew. The best part, it's 100% free. And you have access to me in addition to everybody else in the community. In fact, the podcast will be there so you can talk about the things we talk about in the podcast right there in the community. There's also some premium content if you want to go deeper in the work I'm doing, but mostly it's about building relationships and community and about sharing resources and supporting each other. So come on over and check it out. It's grieftogrowth.com/community. I'll see you inside. Close your eyes and imagine. What if the things in life that cause us the greatest pain, the things that bring us grief, are challenges? Challenges designed to help us grow, to ultimately become what we were always meant to be. We feel like we've been buried, but what if, like a seed, we've been planted? And having been planted, we grow to become a mighty tree. Now, open your eyes. Open your eyes to this way of viewing life. Come with me as we explore your true, infinite, eternal nature. This is Grief to Growth, and I am your host, Brian Smith. Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Grief to Growth. I'm Brian Smith, in case you don't know who I am, and we explore things, life, death, the meaning of life, all those little things are things we talk about on this program. Today, we have the privilege of interviewing a remarkable individual whose life and story and his insights are not just going to be inspiring. I think they're also transformative. His name is Nick Shaw. He's an accomplished executive coach. He's an author and a speaker, and he's known for his deep understanding of personal transformation, self-discovery, and authentic leadership. And our discussion today, we're going to talk about Nick's introspective journey highlighted in his book, My Teacher, My Son, Lessons on Life, Loss, and Love. And this book isn't just a memoir, it's a beacon of hope and guidance and invites us all to look inward with honesty and with self-compassion. His personal experience of losing his son, William, at a young age has propelled Nick to help others navigate their complex emotions and experiences and encouraging us to live a life with intention and meaning. So throughout the episode, the plan is to dive into questions that touch upon how Nick has embraced adversity with an open mind, his advice to parents who have gone through similar tragedies, and the ways he's implemented his learnings in his life and his work. We'll also talk about his journey into authorship and how that's aided in his healing and his learning. So whether you're seeking to understand the depths of grief, look for ways to transform your leadership style, or really just in need of a story that resonates with the spirit of human resilience, I think this episode's for you. So join us as we explore these profound lessons with Nick Shaw. And after the episode, go over to grieftogrowth.com/community, and we can talk about it there and answer any questions you might have. So with that, I want to welcome to Grief to Growth, Nick Shaw.
Hey, Brian, thank you for having me on your show. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation and sharing my story with your audience.
I'm glad to have you here. You and I share something in common right off the bat, the loss of a child. And first, I like to ask people, before we talk about the tragedy, tell me about William. What's William like?
Yeah. So first off, thank you for that question. I think it's such an important question to ask someone who's lost anybody, right? All we really want to do is share our loved one that we lost with the world. And so William was this so he was my oldest son, so firstborn, and with that he was a very good boy, right? He liked to please in some ways. He definitely followed the rules and things of that nature. He's a very compassionate little boy. I think that was one of the most remarkable things about him. He could just sort of sense what was going on with someone and sort of knew how to be with them, and sometimes that just meant giving people space. So I remember countless times where I felt that from him. He loved to love, like he just loved his family. He loved his parents, his little brother. He would always try to give us this big bear hug with his bony little body, but you just felt that love kind of coursing through you. He was an active child, loved to engage in different sports. he's not so much a team sports guy. He did what I would call more alternative sports like skateboarding, skiing, parkour, which, free running, which was that was his favorite sport.
Hmm.
Yeah, and he loved music too. That was another thing that he and I shared. And yeah, he was just a beautiful, caring, loving little boy. One of the common things people said about him after he died was that he was an old soul. So that's kind of how I think of him.
That seems to be common with children that leave early. That compassion, that zest for life, that
Hmm.
feeling of an old soul. I hear that a lot. I talk to a lot of parents who have had children transition, and that seems to be a really common theme.
Yeah, yeah. It's I get it in one respect. I mean, and I know everyone has a different perspective on life, death, and what might come after. Um, and there's a big part of me as I've reflected and gone over everything that happened to William and to our family that he was here for a purpose, and it was his, he served whatever that purpose was, and then it was his time to go to whatever's next.
Hmm. And if you don't mind me asking, how did he pass?
We were on a family vacation in Big Sky, Montana. It was February 19th of 2019, and so we were a family who skied. I grew up skiing, and it was a passion sport of mine. And then William
Hmm.
really liked it. He was a good skier. He was on the ski team, um, and we were, started the day like any other day. And he and I went to the top of the mountain to ski some of the more challenging runs. While my wife and younger son were on the lower part of the mountain because at the time my younger son was 6, so he couldn't quite, go to the top of the mountain. And as we were making our way to the bottom to meet up with my wife and younger son Kai, we were on what's called a catwalk, which is effectively it's a road that kind of winds its way down the mountain. It's just an easier way to the bottom. And I was in front of him because I'm heavier than him, so my weight carried me a little bit ahead of him, probably 10, 15 feet. And I really didn't think much of it. These things, you barely have to turn. You kind of just, it's a nice mellow ride to the bottom. And as I made a curve in the road, because it kind of winds down the mountain, a skier came whizzing past me and said, "Hey, was that your kid who went into the woods?" Because off the side of these catwalks are slopes of, deep, deep powder snow amidst trees.
Hmm.
And so it kind of surprised me. I quickly stopped and took my skis off and started walking back up the hill. And when I tried to look for Wayne, he was nowhere to be found. So I don't even know what happened to him. Eventually, a search ensued, and he was eventually found. Something caused him to ski off the side of the catwalk, and he hit a tree and he died on impact.
Oh man, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That's I it's hard to imagine. All of our losses are tragic and terrible, but that sudden loss, I know what that's like. So how did you and your family respond after the loss of William?
It was, as it turns your life upside down. I mean, this is not in anybody's playbook for how their life is going to unfold. Um, and, we were just thrown into a state of chaos, uncertainty. Our lives were just turned upside down. I mean, literally,
Hmm. Hmm.
everything that we thought how life was going to unfold, it was all done. That was gone. Um, and so, as we made our way back to Massachusetts from Big Sky, each of us, my wife, my younger son, Kai, we started our process, or each of our unique and individual process of grieving. Um, I think one of the things that saved us was, my wife and I had this very clear resolve that we were not going to let this destroy the rest of our family. Um, because you hear the horror stories, right? When something like this
Yeah.
happens, can put a lot of strain on a marriage, and then that may fall apart, and then that further impacts any surviving children. So we had this what I call look in the eye moment of we're not going to let this destroy us, and we got a lot of help. We joined grief groups. We got a family therapist. We did whatever we needed to do. I was fortunate enough to be able to take a 6-month leave of absence because I needed to just process and make sense of it all.
Right.
So we did whatever we needed to just to try to give each other the space we needed, but also move through the process of grief together.
Yeah. So you leaned into it. Sounds like you were very intentional about healing.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's a great way to to frame it for yes. I mean, yeah, I mean, I guess by nature I'm an intentional guy, and in part my training as a coach probably helped me with that. Um, but for me, I was very intentional with how I processed everything. I made it almost a routine every day to really spend time and sit with it and meditate on it and pose the question, what can I learn from this?
Hmm. So you were a coach before William passed?
I was, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And so how did your coaching change, do you think, after that?
I think for one thing I that I learned in all this was about vulnerability. Um, and so I think as one of the things I now bring more to my coaching is my own vulnerability as a way of connecting with my clients.
Mm.
Uh, both 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 the process of grieving and the process of, I guess, which is part of grieving, was writing my book, really caused me to open up in ways I never had before, and now I bring that more to my coaching, and I believe that when you are vulnerable, it's an invitation for others to be vulnerable with you, and in particular when you're talking about coaching individuals, if you want people to grow and transform, it is going to require some vulnerability on their part. So if you can invite that in with your own way of being, then that can only be beneficial to the client.
Yeah. And how you said your son Kai was 6 at the time. How has he dealt with it, losing his big brother?
He's been remarkably resilient, which has been really an inspiration for me, and I talk about this in the book. Um, and he was 6, right? And so and I
Yeah,
always said, if if this is going to happen to a child, 6 is probably one of the better ages it can happen, because he still has memories of William, and he still talks about William today, and he loves looking at pictures of William. But at that age, he's not old enough to really get how big, the gravity of the situation.
mm,
So at that age, he was, he again, like, I guess the best way, he was just very resilient, and he just plodded on with his life, which is interesting to observe as a parent, because you're struggling to do that. And even as he's grown up, because he's 11, he'll be 12 in May. He continues to just process it in his own way. And the interesting thing for him is he'll continue to process this through every sort of developmental or stage of development, right? Because
sure.
it'll continue to make sense in different ways for him as he grows up. So it's an unfolding process for him.
Hmm. So, how did you? Again, devastation. I can only imagine. How did you go from that to looking at this through a more positive lens?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief, the number 2, growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode.
There was a very specific moment where I kind of made a little bit of that inflection, because as you know, in the early days of grief and in the aftermath of this kind of loss, you're devastated. You go to some very dark places. I know I did. And for me, I think a big part of what happened to me when William died, I was cracked open. Like, so everything about me, who I was as a person, was just exposed. It was just out there in front of me for me to either confront or sort of do something with, or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I kind of liken it to the soupy mess of rawness that, it was there. And I initially I didn't want anything to do with that. I didn't want to confront who I was as a person. I didn't want to deal with any of it. But what happens when you try to push that stuff away, when it's basically begging to be attended to, it just comes back at you in a very forceful and negative way. And the more I would fight, the darker and darker place I would go. And there was one day specifically where I was in a very, very dark place, and I lost all hope, and I was considering some pretty dark options, to be honest with you. But as I was going to that place, it's kind of in the back of my mind, from my subconscious or whatever, there was this sort of something distracting me. There was something starting to emerge. Um, a light, a notion started to kind of be present. And so I started focusing on that.
Mm.
And as I started to focus more on that, I kind of came up with a mantra, which is, what would Willie want?
Oh.
And what would Willie want for me, for our family? And he certainly wouldn't want me to do something stupid and harm myself and create more suffering, for not only for myself, but for my wife and my younger son, Kai. And so in that moment, I realized, how I behave, how I show up, what my attitudes are with everything that happened will either honor or dishonor William. It will honor or dishonor this event that happened to William and to our family. And so I just, in that moment, I was like, it was clear what I had to do. I was not going to do something that would dishonor who he was or his legacy. And that was the sort of shift for me that said, okay, we gotta do this in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really important. What would Willie want? Because, there's, again, especially with parents, when we lose a child, I find it very common. There's this feeling of guilt. What could I have done differently to prevent this? The survivor's guilt, it's not fair that I'm here and they're not. And that can cause people to say, okay, I need to stay in this very dark place because I deserve it. I deserve this punishment. So did you go through any of that?
Yes. The short answer is yes, because I was with him. It was me and him skiing down to the bottom of the mountains. I was with him. So I had tremendous guilt. I mean, I was with him. I should have prevented it, right? And there's a couple of things that helped me with that guilt. I think the first thing that really was quite an amazing thing that happened was, so I was with William, and then when a search ensued, eventually they found him and they brought him to this little ski patrol clinic at the bottom of the mountain. So I was brought there and was waiting there for them to bring him in, and they were going to try to treat him. And so I was there alone, and my wife was still looking for him. She thought maybe he somehow skied back to the place we were staying, so she wasn't there yet. And I found out, the doctor came out and shared the news with me. And so there was probably, time is murky, but let's call it 10, 15 minutes between I heard the news and my wife is, because she was en route, would arrive there.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we first saw each other, I didn't want to tell her over the phone what the outcome was. And so I told her when she came into the clinic, and as you'd expect, she broke down, which is obviously a totally normal reaction. But as she stood up and sort of composed herself, she looked me in the eye and she said, "It's not your fault."
Mm-hmm.
And I can't tell you how much of a relief that was for me, because I was just tearing myself apart. And that was just a momentary relief to know, okay, at least I know she believes that, and that gives me a little bit of reprieve. Not that it didn't, my guilt didn't end there, but it was an opening.
Right. Right.
I think the other thing that consumed me was we didn't know how he died. So there was a thought in my mind, well, if I had found him, would I have been able to save him?
Right.
And you hear these stories of people doing superhuman things to save their kids. I went into the woods to try to find him, but I was chest deep in snow and I couldn't move. So that was really causing a lot of questions for me as well. And so but when we eventually found, we got the coroner's report and found out he died on impact,
Mm-hmm.
that again, too, at least I realized, okay, there's nothing I could have done differently. And Brian, I've revisited that day thousands of times.
Yeah.
And, I can honestly say, would that day happen again? There's nothing I would do differently. He didn't die on this crazy challenging ski run. He died on a very uh, simple run.
Mm-hmm.
We've skied on those kinds of runs many, many times. We made a wrong turn. We weren't even supposed to be on that slope. So there's a lot of little things that happened.
Mm-hmm.
We've all heard of the butterfly effect that caused that outcome to happen. Um, so I don't believe there's anything I could have done differently that day or would have done differently should that day occur again. It just things conspired to make that outcome happen. And I have a line in my book where I kind of got to a place where this was just meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which is crazy to hear myself say it in some respects, but it is what I believe. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, and I hesitate to take you through that again, but I think it's really important for people that are listening because, again, parents, I think almost universally feel some sense of guilt. In your case, you were there, but other parents feel guilty because they weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
They might feel guilty because their child died of a drug overdose, and I should have been able to stop them, or their child took their own life, and I should have known it was coming.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
almost universal that parents find a way to blame themselves. And I think it helps when we hear other people share their guilt to realize how silly our guilt is. Because with my daughter, she had rheumatoid arthritis, and I would give her these injections, and I
Mm-hmm.
gave her an
Mm-hmm.
injection a couple of days before. So I thought, well, did I do something wrong? When I gave her the injection, or she had a minor heart condition. We'd taken her to a cardiologist. Should I have taken her to a different cardiologist? Should I have,
Mm-hmm.
questioned him? So we all go through it. As I said, we all, and I talked to a mother. Her daughter was killed in a drunk driving accident. Her daughter was an adult. She didn't even live with her.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll never forget. She said, I did 7 things wrong that day. And I said, 7. And she named them. She named the 7 things she did wrong that day. And I said, you probably did those same 7 things every day. Just like with
Absolutely.
you in that run. I mean, we don't know what's going to happen. And you talk about the butterfly effect. I think it's that movie to me is so instructional in this idea. Like if I had done something different, it would have turned out different.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the game of what if, right? What if I'd done this, or what if that, or I think what happens, why we do that, or at least this has sort of been my insight in processing everything, is because if we can figure out how we might have done things differently, it gives us a bit of a false sense of control. Okay, well,
Yeah.
the next time this happens, I'll be good. Well, it doesn't matter because there's not going to be a next time.
Yeah.
And the reality is that control is an illusion. I mean, I did everything that day to try to protect my son. He was wearing a ski helmet. We were on an easy slope. It was, and things happen that are always going to be beyond our control. And I think, unfortunately, that human nature has a yearning for control that is less of a real thing than we realize.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and you're right. And it puts us in a catch-22 situation because we do want that sense of control because we think that way we can control our future. But then it also gives us the sense of guilt because we said we were in control and we allowed this to happen.
Right. Exactly.
So it doesn't really solve anything, but we have to go through that phase, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's part of the grief process. And hopefully people are able to come through it, because I know for many people they're not. I mean, many people aren't able to get through it, and the guilt follows them around for the rest of their lives, which is not a great way to live.
Yeah. So you mentioned you went to grief counseling. Was there anything you learned in grief counseling that helped? But because you also mentioned this insight you had, it sounds like it almost came from within.
I would say a lot of I mean, yes, I learned some. I think the grief counselor, what she did, which was great, was she helped all of us learn how to express our emotions, as a family, with each other. And this is particularly helpful for me and for my son, because at 6, and then, and he turned 7, how do you process this emotion? How do you express yourself in that way? So I
Right.
think from that perspective, that was tremendously, tremendously helpful.
And so this, but the insight where you said to yourself, okay, what would Willie do?
Hmm.
Where do you think that came from?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there. I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
I think it came from him, you know. Um, there's no other way to say it, but I think it came from him, you know. His energy, his spirit, his love for me, for our family, it came from that, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Yeah, I don't think there's any other way to say it, to be honest with you. I believe he's still out there in the universe, in whatever beyond it exists, and he was just wanting for me, um, what he wanted for all of us, right? Which is to continue to endure and to live our lives and not let this thing destroy us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's my belief too. So
Yeah.
I think that beyond what would Willie want, I would say what does Willie want, because I do believe that our children are still with us and they're still involved in our lives. And
Hmm.
you mentioned earlier that you think maybe this was destined. I think it was. And it's crazy for me to say that because I never believed that before Shayna passed.
Hmm.
I didn't believe in destination or soul planning or any of that type of stuff. But for me, it's the only thing that makes sense at this point in my life that this was destined to happen because what does happen. What happened is we can go through all the what ifs and we never know what the what ifs are, but we do know what we have. We know where we
Hmm.
are,
Yeah.
and that's the one thing that we do know.
Yes. Yeah. And I think I think the process of grief, whether you go to a place of spirituality or afterlife or whatever it looks like for each individual person, because I do believe grief is very unique,
Hmm.
but it is about getting to a place of acceptance. Like this thing happened, and you cannot, you have to get to a place where it happened. Now, what do I make of it? What
Right.
what 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 choice do I have to engage with the world, given that this thing happened to me? So yeah, I think acceptance to me is the hopeful destination for anyone who goes through something like this.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said. I think all these other things we go through, the guilt and the anger and all that stuff, those are ways of kind of, I think, avoiding
Hmm.
just saying that this happened. It doesn't mean we have to like it. You know,
Mm-mm.
it's
No, 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 not at all. I mean, it's no, yeah, exactly. It doesn't. We absolutely don't have to like it, but I think yeah, people think I think it's a good point you're making. People think, well, acceptance means yeah, liking it or being okay with it. I'm not okay that my son died, but I accept it.
yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very important distinction,
Yeah.
because and there's also did you go through like, okay, he's never going to fill in the blank. These things are never going to happen. And
Hmm.
then the survivor's guilt that comes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you long for all the moments you were hoping to have but can no longer have.
Yeah.
So seeing him grow up to become a man, right? I mean, that would have been. Yeah, I was really looking forward to seeing. I mean, I think that's something that all parents look forward to seeing how their kids grow up and become adults, right?
Hmm.
Um, just doing different things that we like to do together, skiing more together. I mean, that day before the accident, when we went to the top of the mountain, he was skiing like I'd never seen him ski before. And
Mm.
as someone who grew up skiing and for whom skiing is a passion, I was bursting with pride to see my son just crushing it on the mountain. I mean,
Yeah.
it was amazing, and here we were doing a thing that we both loved and we loved doing together. It was magical. I wanted more of those, but I at least got that one. you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, you long for what could have been. I think that will always be somewhat present. And I get to see a little bit of what could have been in with his brothers, with Kai and another part of the story is we decided to have another child, and we're fortunate enough to be able to have another child. And so
Hmm.
our youngest son, Bodie, was born a year and a half after William died.
Hmm.
So I get to see it now with with Bodie. So
Yeah. Well, I think again, I want to let people know when we're talking about acceptance and stuff, we're not saying again we don't have to like it. And
mhm,
I still have those moments with I think about my daughter because she was 15. So
mhm, mhm.
what would have happened? What would high school graduation look like? And she wanted to be a veterinarian. Would she have done that? So we do have those thoughts. When you think of Willie today, what image comes to your mind?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm really reason I'm kind of pausing here is it's a thought I recently had. I still see him as my 9-year-old son.
Hmm.
So this past December 20th is his birthday. He would have turned 14, and I don't know why this year was different because at 14 for a boy, you're kind of now you're starting to become a man, right? You're
Right.
you're
Right.
taller, maybe your voice is getting deeper, right? So yeah, that for the first time, I was like, well, what would he look like at 14? But I just still picture him as, who he was when he was 9.
Yeah, I think that's a hard thing when we someone passes as a child because there's this thing in the community. A lot of times people say forever fill in the blank, forever a
Yeah,
9, forever
yeah.
17, forever
Mhm.
15. Um, again, for me personally, I don't see that anymore because I don't believe that their life ended. They're not forever that age. They
Yeah,
still, I think we when we cross over, we still grow and evolve. That's what I've understood. So. Yeah, I do picture Shayna at 15 a lot of times, but also it's like, okay, she would be a not a middle age, but she'd be in her mid 20s at this point, So
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
also picture her, that way.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's I mean, we were so used to experiencing people in their physical form, right? And so it's
Yes.
natural for us to go there. And obviously it's harder to imagine or to even conceptualize what they are today because
Yeah.
it's beyond the realm of our experience, at least at this stage.
Right.
But I, I I I still try to engage with him, and but it's not in a physical form anymore.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, the relationship is definitely different.
yeah,
But the thing is, what I want people to understand, there's still the relationship.
yes. I think a big part of grieving or the grieving process is about getting to a place where you have a different relationship with the person you lost.
Yeah.
You can't the relationship you had, which is very physical and three-dimensional, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
uh, it's no longer here, but it doesn't mean you can't have a different relationship with them. And I think part of the grieving process is trying to figure that out and figure out what does that relationship look like for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So what does it look like for you with Willie now? You said you said you I think you said you still try to connect with him. In what way does that manifest?
I'll often so I meditate and oftentimes not every session of meditation, but there'll be times where I will just pose a question to him. I kind of view him as my teacher,
Yeah,
which is the title of the book, My Teacher, My Son.
right.
It's an expression that came to me sort of in the cup in call it the 2 or 3 weeks after William died. I was
Hmm.
reflecting on who he was and his experience or my experience of him and the impact he'd had on me. And I realized he'd been teaching me since the day he was born. Um, and I believe he taught me in birth and life and in death, and now continues to teach me um, in his new form. So I view him very much as a teacher, a guide, to help me navigate this life as best I can.
Yeah. So what made you decide to put your experience into a book?
As you know, you go through a life-changing experience like losing a child. You see life and differently. It automatically allows you to see life and form different perspectives about
Hmm.
what it means to live a purposeful and meaningful life. Um, and when William died, for me, I need to make meaning out of it. For me, meaning meant I need to learn from it. How can I live my life differently? Because you lose a child and your mortality stares you in the face.
Yeah,
We're not here
absolutely.
forever. And so how can we make this life we have as, again, meaningful and purposeful as possible? So I did a lot of reflecting and learned things. And I thought, I want to share my learnings with anybody because hopefully no one has to go through what I had to go through, but they can at least benefit from the learnings. And so that was the inspiration. And my book, certainly it can help people who are going through a similar experience in grief, but people go through all different types of challenges in life. And I think the lessons are applicable not just to grief, but to any challenge somebody faces in life. Um, so I just wanted to put it out there and share it because I thought it could be helpful.
Yeah, I think it's great that you did put it out there and share it. But I also find a lot of times people find it very cathartic. I think to write to put their thoughts down, whether they actually even publish them or not. There's something about going through the process.
Absolutely. For me, I talked a little earlier about this notion of being cracked open and sort of with that having all my fears and insecurities and limiting beliefs and false narrative, all the crap, all my baggage come back to me. Um, and and the process of writing caused me to explore, examine, and confront some of those things and try to live differently. And I even say at the end of my book, I now have what at least for me, are a set of guiding principles for how I aspire to live my life. And I say aspire because I'm not there yet, but that's my aspiration. I want to continue to do the work to live in that way because I believe it will allow me to live, yeah, my life in a better way.
Yeah. Well, as a coach, you're trained in all these things, right? Fears and limiting beliefs and all this, and we walk people through it, and we face some of our own. Were there any things about yourself that surprised you after Willie's passing that you're just like, I didn't know this was one of my things?
No, actually, which is unfortunate, right? Because, and maybe the surprising thing is if I knew this all along, why haven't I done anything about it? Right.
Yeah.
Um, so no, I mean, a lot of the stuff that came up, I knew it was now just a time to just really say, okay, do you still want to carry this stuff around with you? Do you
Yeah.
still want to live this narrative? So I think that was a surprising thing. And it was a bit of like, okay, are you going to do this thing or not? Right. Because life is not forever. And you can continue living the way you have and living according to whatever story you have about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But again, back to what would Willie want? Would he want that for me? No, he would not want that for me. So that was, I think, I think that to me was sort of a big aha. It's like, it's time to let go of that stuff. A little bit of I'll share another story about William, which I think is important and was also quite inspiring for me. When William was just shy of his 8th birthday, my wife takes the boys to a Unitarian church and they have great programming for kids. And William grappled with anxiety. He was in therapy. He just, he wasn't at ease with himself. But
Hmm.
he'd done the work. He'd gone through therapy and was getting. You could see him sort of loosening up and letting go of that. Late, I guess it was late 2016. 17, right before his 8th birthday, they did an exercise where they asked the kids to declare a mantra for themselves. And in bright red marker on a note card, he wrote, "Be yourself."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's the old soul, right? Like the kid, not even 8, says, "I'm going to be myself, be yourself," right? We still have
Wow.
the note card. We actually have it framed. And he goes on to not just talk, not just to declare it, but actually live it. Because in the last year of life, he kind of came into his own, found his sense of style, what he liked, what he didn't like, and he was himself. And here I look at myself and at the time I was 44 when William died, and think about, well, how have I been myself? I mean, sure, I have in some respects, but I've let a lot of things get in the way of being myself. And so,
Hmm.
he was my model. Like, he made that declaration and he did it. So now I got to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of another reason for writing the book. I think a lot of people have struggled with that. And, I want to help people not struggle with that. So,
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really, really good point that we just hit on there because, I asked you, did you have any surprises about the things you were carrying? And you're like, no, because you were aware of them, but you're
yeah,
still carrying them, right? So maybe
yes.
what you learned maybe was to live these things that you were aware of.
I think that's right. Yeah. It's you don't have to accept it. And you have a choice. We all have a choice. We just have to realize that we have a choice to either accept them or say, no, I'm going to choose a different path. I'm not going to let my story be written for me by my history. I'm going to let it be written by, you know, my heart and soul and who I am as a person. Um, so I think, yeah, that was the aha moment, I think, for me, in processing everything. And even writing the book, the first iterations of it were, it was a good account of the story, but, through the editing process, I realized every round of editing, I was opening myself up more and giving more of myself to the book, being myself more in the context of the book. And that was the first time I'd ever done that.
Hmm.
So a side of me that I'd buried a long time ago was allowed to come out in the book.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about your coaching and how it changed your coaching. Um, did you have clients before that you still work with now that they notice a change in your coaching?
It's a good question. No one's ever commented on it. And I do have a handful of clients who are still with me. But no one's ever said, "Oh my God, you're a different coach."
Yeah.
But I just feel more at ease. I think when I'm engaging someone, I give myself more permission to go to places where perhaps I wouldn't have gone previously.
Yeah. I think one of the things about coaches is they want you to be real. The word vulnerable you used earlier. I think people want to know that you can relate to their struggles.
Absolutely.
And I know a lot of times it's my daughter is a mental health counselor and they teach them, leave yourself outside. This is not about you. You can't tell personal stories. You can't talk about what's going on with you. But I notice my clients, they crave that. They want to know what did you go through? How did you feel when this happened to you? Because they want to know that all those feelings are having are acceptable.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's a relationship, which means each person has to bring themselves to the relationship for it to work. And I get in certain mental health settings, there's probably a reason not to bring yourself
Yeah.
to the table. But I think coaching, I've only found it to be helpful in when you do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you so you're 5 years out after Willie's passing, and so how are you seeing your life evolving at this point?
I think it's, as I said before, it's really trying to put into to practice, the lessons that I learned. And it's work. It's not a snap of a finger just because you learn a lesson. It's the application or the implementation of that lesson that's the hard part, right? Because we're combating habits and old ways of thinking, and so I think it's for me it's brought an intentionality to actively trying to do the work and practice things, and reflect on how it's going. And but I believe we're all works in progress,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think this life we have is about developing ourselves as human beings, and getting out from under our very noisy brains, and things of that nature, our egos, things like that. It's a journey, and I'm just on that journey, and I realize that. And some days are harder than others, but it's part of what I'm here to do.
Yeah. And so when it comes to grief, and I think you mentioned this earlier, um, sometimes people ask me like, okay, when is this going to be over? When can I move on from this? When am I going to get back to the person I was before? All those types of questions. So I don't know if you get those questions or not, or how would you respond to that?
So you will never be the same person you were before. First off, I kind of look at, and maybe you have had a similar experience, but I kind of have had two lives now. I've had life
Absolutely.
before everything happened. So life up until the time William died. Now I have a completely new life. It's kind of how my life has been bifurcated.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm a different person. I will forever be changed by that event that day. Um, and it's weird because I can't see my life differently. I
Right.
can't I can't. This is my life. This is what's happened. And I've just accepted that. So you're not going to be the same person because something of this magnitude will change you forever. That said, it doesn't mean you have to walk around, with the black cloud and rain over your head for the rest of your days. And I think that getting to that point of acceptance hopefully will allow you to move forward.
Yeah. Well, that's a point that's I think again we need to emphasize because when people ask me that when they're early in grief, what they mean is like, am I going to be like this for the rest of my life? Am I going to
Yeah.
be miserable and in pain every day and not wanting to be here and still carrying the guilt? And I know unfortunately people who are like that 10, 15 years after their child has
Hmm.
passed. And what I tell them is no, it doesn't have to be like that. You won't
No.
you won't go back to who you were, but you can go forward. You don't have to stay where you are.
Yes. No, I think that's a great way to put it. You don't have to. I mean, that initial those initial days and weeks and months of grief are kind of they have to happen. It's just part of how you process it, and um, it's just a way to it's a way for somebody to try to process and make sense of everything.
Hmm.
Uh, and to your point, it doesn't have to be that way forever. Now, it can be if you let it run wild. I'll share a story. My wife and I were looking for different grief groups, and we found one in the town next door to ours. And that night, there was only two other people and us. It was a grief group for people who lost children.
Hmm.
And the original moderator wasn't there because he was sick. So one of the attendees was the moderator, and he was an older gentleman, probably in his, I don't know, call it mid 60s or something. And he'd lost his daughter like 20, 25 years ago. And he said something that just the fear of God in us, which was, he said, I can honestly say there's never been a day in my life since my daughter died where I've been able to be happy.
Mm.
And my wife and I looked at each other and we're like, I mean, this is like, maybe a month after William died. We're like, no way. Like, that can't be. Like, that is not how we're going to do this thing. So it was hard to hear, but it was also, we had a model for what we didn't want, how we didn't want to come through this. So you have a choice. And there's a time to make that choice, and it's not in those early days of grief. I
Yes.
think one of the things that's important, and that I think I learned, but probably the hard way, is where you are is where you are in grief, and particularly those early days. Like, you're gonna be a mess. You're gonna be
Yeah.
depressed. You're
Yeah.
gonna be. It's just part of it. Don't judge it. Let it be, and then as time unfolds, you will hopefully move forward in a more positive way.
Yeah. I had almost the exact same experience. It was only months after Shane had passed, and we went to a meeting at a church, and there were probably 10 people there, maybe. I will never forget this woman. Her daughter passed like 10 years before, and she went to visit her grave like I don't know, almost every day.
Hmm.
She was just as miserable, it seemed to me, as she was the day her daughter had died. And up to that point, I resolved that I was going to be miserable for the rest of my life. I was like, that's what it's going to be, because
Yeah.
I'm going to honor Shayna by being miserable. I
Yeah.
love her so
Yeah.
much that I'm just going to be miserable, and people just have to accept it. And but when I looked at that woman, I was like, no, if I'm going to stay here, I
Yeah.
can't live that way for the rest of my life, because it's not fair to me and it's not fair to the people around me.
That's right.
And my daughter wouldn't want that. So
Yeah.
that was my wake up call. And so it's funny because there's an old saying, you can either be a great example or a horrible warning. And this one was like a horrible warning. I
Yeah.
didn't,
Yeah.
I,
That's
I,
that. I mean, as tough as it was for both of us to see that, it was, I mean, thank God we saw it, right?
yeah, yeah, I'm grateful for her.
Yeah.
I'm grateful because it woke me up, and here it is. 9 years later, I'm still like, okay, you don't want to go there,
Yeah.
and I tell my clients it is a choice.
Yeah, it absolutely is a choice. And I think I can relate to this notion of, yep, I'm okay being this miserable because, at least for me, and I suspect it was the same way for you, I associated not forgetting William as just always being sad about losing him.
Hmm.
And so for me, I had this sort of construct of, if I stop being sad, then I will forget William, and I don't want to lose him for a second time.
Right, right,
Uh, and I think that's where where it's, you got to get form the new relationship, right? So that you don't have to. The only way you can relate to them is not by being in the depths of grief.
yeah.
So
I remember because, like I said, Shayna was 15, and I was like, I've known people that seem like they moved on. I hate that phrase, moved on.
yeah,
And I'm like, and I remember when someone said to me about moving on, I'm like, I don't want to move on. I
yeah,
I that's not even what I want. That's not in the realm of possibility. I like the phrase "move forward" because I moved
too.
forward with her,
Yeah,
and it takes a while to get there because I thought I don't want to forget like the way her voice was. I don't want to forget this. I don't want to forget that. And the first few days when I didn't cry, in the shower, I was
hmm,
like, okay, what's going on here?
yeah,
It's like this isn't right. I should be crying every day. I should be miserable all the time. But that's not what we need. We don't have to do that, and
no,
it's not part of the design either.
yeah, yeah, it's, and I think that's something that everyone has to sort of figure out as they go through their process, right?
Yeah.
But look, I think, unfortunately, grief, in the movies or whatever, it's portrayed as this forever, you're sobbing to no end, and so we have this sort of picture in our mind for how we should be when we're grieving.
Hmm.
And even the literature on grief, it's like it paints it as this very like linear process, right?
Right.
It doesn't. It's a huge disservice because everybody's going to do it differently, and you don't have to necessarily be sobbing every day if that's not who you are, right? So I think, I mean, I went through, I'm sure you did too, of just self judgment, self criticism. Like, what's wrong with me? Why aren't I this? Why aren't I that? In
Hmm.
my grief, and yeah, you're just making the process harder than it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, we talked about acceptance of the situation, but also acceptance of ourselves and acceptance of the process. Again, I talk to people, and almost universally, they're judging themselves, whether it's been 3 months or 2 years or five
Mhm.
years. I'll hear them say, I'm not where I'm supposed to be," and I'm like, you're right where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you're
and,
actually
yeah. And where are you supposed to be, right? Like
right.
what? Yeah, that's yeah. So
So yeah, I think that's great that with the book and with your speech, you're giving people basically permission to be who they are,
mhm.
and understand these feelings are natural. Um, you talked about going to a dark place. Again, there's another thing I find is almost universal. People, I was talking to a parent just the other day, and I hear this a lot. It's like, I wasn't thinking about, really committing suicide. I wasn't really contemplating it, but I would think about it.
Yeah,
It's like the thought would come to my mind, and wouldn't it be? And I'm like, and we're scared to say that a lot of times. It's like, yeah, I think it's almost universal. I think a lot of parents go through that, where it's like we have that thought, and then we realize, no, I'm not going to do this to my family. I'm not going. It's just, but the thought crosses our mind, and then people think, okay, well, I must be going crazy because I've never thought this before.
yeah, yeah. No, it's. I think it comes from a place of, loss of hope, and there's also, I know for me, part of it was yearning to be with William.
Yeah, there
Yeah,
there is that feeling like, yeah, your kid, you want to be with your kid. You've always been with your kid. You
Yeah.
plan to be with them for the rest of your life, and you're just like, you're torn, right? Because you also have same thing as me. You have another child here, and you have your wife here, so it's like I can't
Yeah.
be
What
in
do you
both
do?
places.
Yeah. 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 It's an interesting topic because and you don't hear a lot about it. Because I think just the having suicidal thoughts or it's such a taboo thing, right?
Hmm.
And there's an immediate association of you're going crazy or you need to be on watch or
Hmm.
whatever the stories are about it. But it is a real thought. I think it is a part of it's as you say, it's a common experience for a lot of parents who lose a child. And it doesn't mean you're going to do it, but it's just interesting that it's not something that's ever really talked about that much in the grief space.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's a very natural thought. If you just think again, we're as a parent, your job is to protect your child,
Yeah,
especially when your child's, a literal child, right? So you're like, I have to be there. I have to be there to protect him. I've always been there to protect him.
yeah,
So I think it's a very natural thought. It doesn't mean we should act on it. And
yeah,
again, most people don't.
yeah,
But you're judged for even having the thought. No, don't think like that.
yeah.
So I like to let people know, hey, I went through it. I
Hmm.
think I know a lot of people do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I talk about it directly in my book. I mean, I share the whole everything. I mean, it's an open book, literally, like of what happened and what I experienced. So
Yeah. Well, so to remind people of the title of the book and where they
mhm.
can get it and where people can reach you.
Yeah. So the book is called My Teacher, My Son: Lessons on Life, Loss, and Love. You can really buy it anywhere books are sold. It's on Amazon. You can get it at any of the big bookstores. If you're adverse to big box and want to shop local, you can certainly order it in your local bookstore. Just give them the title and the book. It's in the book distribution network, so
Hmm.
you get it at a local bookstore. If you want to learn more about me, I have a website. It's called meetnickshaw.com. I have blogs that I write that I share based on different experiences I've had, different thoughts. I any podcast I'm on, I will put on my site. So yeah, if you want to learn more about me or reach out, you can go to that site.
Awesome. Oh, great. Nick, it was great to meet you today. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being so vulnerable and
Hmm.
sharing your story. I know that helps a lot of people. We don't get a lot of fathers doing this, so I'm
Hmm.
always grateful when I see a male across from me because I think again, men kind of need that permission to say, it's okay to share this, it's okay to have these feelings. So I appreciate what you're doing.
Likewise, thank you for doing this important work and yeah, we need to get more men to to express themselves and share what they're going through. It wasn't my original inclination, but I think the more we can do that, it helps not only them but the rest of their family. So yeah,
Yeah, awesome. Well, have a great rest of your day.
yeah, you too.
Bye. Hey there, if you liked this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you liked. If you didn't like this episode, come on over and talk about it. Let me know what you didn't like. Go to grief2growth.com/community and look for Talk About the Podcast. I'll see you there.